between, in that 1.5 hours of walking, I met nothing but people who wish me a good evening, hello, buenas noches, um, and like no fighting like we'd see in the UK, no one throwing up on the side of the street, no police cars wailing around trying to lock up hooligans or whatever, no thieves, no knife crime, no people dressed all in black with balaclavas, no electric scooters snatching mobile phones out of hands, none of that crap that we were getting used to in Europe and North America. Like, I felt safer walking home in San Salvador on that one night than I would have if I was in London or Paris or New York or Montreal or Vancouver, man. Like,
Wow. Wow.
obviously I had my guards up, but after like walking and messing, I went to a gas station at 3 a.m. to pick up some juice for the walk, and there were all the young people hanging out there, coming out of the bars and the clubs. Everyone's having a good time. No aggressivity. I went to the washroom. Everyone's like, "Yeah, after you, man." Like, no stress. Like, so that was like my one anecdote to prove that it is as safe as people say. Because a 3 a.m. Saturday morning walk home is usually the most scary safari concrete jungle time. And San Salvador, nope. I was on my own. I mean, obviously, I'm a guy, so I was thinking, would it be the same if a woman was to walk home alone? And the answer is probably not, just unfortunately because of the way things are. But as a guy on my own with little Spanish and not knowing exactly where I was, I walked home and felt safer than any other developed or like one of these well prestige cities which are unfortunately declining.
Mm,
So
mm.
San Salvador's a place, and that's just my experience in the city. I've also been traveling around in the local areas as well, and I got so many stories, man. I could talk for an hour about just my time here, but but yeah, anyone listening who wants to check it out, like, try and work to get here, try and apply for conferences, try and help out as a volunteer, just by any means possible. I really wanted to be here to see it for myself, and now I'm here. Like, it's like blown me out of the water with what's happening in the country. And like I said, Bitcoin's only a part of it, but I'm very proud to be pushing that part of it, Bitcoin's adoption. Yeah, yeah.
That's amazing to hear. I did say that comparison was the thief of joy, and I wasn't going to compare, apples with oranges. But I'm jealous as fuck right now. That's incredible.
I was as well for like the last 2, 3, 4 years, right? I was always trying to get to conferences. I was trying to get to Miami twice with the lockdowns. I couldn't make it out my country. They locked me up. I was trying to get to adopting last year, but like, I wasn't in that position to just drop money, drop job, and move.
Mm,
I had to work to get here, and I'm so grateful that Bull Bitcoin gave me the opportunity to come out here. But to any Bitcoiner out there, like, you can find your niche. You can find what you like to do, whether it be like yourself, like a podcast, or whether it be like building apps and businesses, or just just being a Bitcoiner in general. Like, the proof of work thing works out eventually. If you dedicate enough time and energy to working with Bitcoiners and in Bitcoin, things like this will come your way. To me, this was a dream only a few months ago, and here I am now. So again, the jealousy is like a good fuel to hustle and to drive and to make it happen, because Bitcoin is definitely like a catalyst to like personal success. I find it has been in my case. I went all in with Bitcoin as a career, and it's paying off very quickly. I love working for Bitcoin. Bitcoin's working for me. Yeah.
unreal, man. Unreal. Let me get to my first question then. How did you
Yeah,
discover
yeah.
Bitcoin?
How did I discover Bitcoin? There's like, I keep on looking at like different people's stories, and there's always like a touch point, which isn't the discovery, and then there's a discovery, right? So
Mm,
my first touch point was maybe in like 20, I want to say like 2013ish, so really early on. But it was in the context of like a 3 a.m. party where a buddy of mine was like, "Oh man, like, I can get his party supplies. There's this website, like, it's called Silk Road, and like, he was a programmer. He was like, yeah, I was like, how do you pay for that? It sounds really suspicious. Like, won't they just find your transaction and lock you up?" He's an Australian dude, actually. He was living in Canada. One of my buddies. He was from Oz, and he was working as a web developer out of Canada. He's like, "No, man, there's like this new way of paying via the internet. It's like like almost impossible to trace. And like I buy these things, they're like tokens, they call them bitcoins, and then I send these bitcoins over to this website, and then they ship me out whatever I've ordered. I was like, okay, cool, sounds complicated. I don't trust it, whatever. So my buddy went ahead and like made his transactions online, and then like a few weeks later, he was like, yeah, I got some Bitcoin left over, and it's going up in value. I was like, sweet. He was like, I might keep it for a while. Then like 6 months later, he was like, buddy, I just made $300 off of the change from my transactions. I was like, wow, insane, cool. I missed the boat, eh? Like I should have got on board then. And then like I moved country. I moved back to the UK and I lived in Scotland for a while. So I kind of forgot about Bitcoin, and I always thought it'd be something I'd have to be like super skilled at with a computer to be able to interact with. So I was like, it's out of my competency. I can't get it. Like it's for programmers. Was my initial touch point with Bitcoin. It's this weird internet money, which is for programmers and illicit internet transactions. So I was like, I don't need it.
Yeah.
But then when I was working in the UK from like 2013 to 2016. I was working at different financial institutions. I worked at like the Bank of Scotland, and I worked at like some investment companies. And like most DGens that worked, it wasn't anything fancy. I was working out of a call center. I was like a call center rat, like we were like the rats in the trenches answering calls and changing addresses. And it was dope though. Like I loved it. I loved the camaraderie and like speaking with all these different people in the call centers. They're like the modern day factories, like in the Western world. So I was hanging out with all these people in the call centers, and like during the lunch breaks, everybody's like looking to hustle, like we're getting paid minimum wage at the call center, but we also know a bit about finance and banking. So people are trading. Everybody's got different apps, and I was trading using eToro back in the day, and just doing a lot of like trading on company earnings around like quarterly earnings. It'd be quite easy to do. You'd work out who was up, who was down, how the company's done in the last few months, and then just kind of trade that. So I'd trade on my lunch breaks just to try and make a bit of extra cash. But then I found out like there was this thing on the platform called Bitcoin, and I was like, oh, there it is again. I thought that was like internet money for programmers, but here it is on my trading platform. I'm gonna trade it because look at it. It's volatile as hell. This is gonna be fun. This will be like my adrenaline shot during the coffee break at the bank. So I started trading it, and quickly I worked out it was on the up. It's around about 2015, 16 that I was doing that, and it was moving so much. I was like, wow, this is wild. Strap me in. Like I'm taking off with this thing. It's great. I wasn't making a lot of money. It was just fun to see, like, it would pay my beer at the weekend, right? So I was like, this is great. I found a hack. I can interface with Bitcoin, and I can pay my beer money with it. Um, and I kept on doing that for like a few months. But then it was at one point I met one of my buddies who was a programmer who did have Bitcoin, and we were talking more and more about Bitcoin and what it is. And he handed me the white paper and was like, if you want to understand Bitcoin, you got to read the white paper. So I actually started off by reading the white paper, and I didn't understand any of it. Like, I understood the abstract a little bit, but I was like, this guy called Satoshi, he's proposing a solution to a problem. And I didn't even understand the problem.
Yeah.
So I wasn't going to
Yeah.
understand the solution to that problem, right? But I was like, okay, so this is legit. Like, I think that's the one thing of reading the white paper that it gave me wasn't like an understanding of Bitcoin. It just gave it a bit of legitimacy. I was like, okay, this is like a scientific paper written by somebody who's very talented with lots of complicated words in it. It seems quite complete. It seems quite well thought out. It seems like something I want to understand a bit more. So I went back to my friend a week later. We'd grab coffee every week, and I'd be like, he was like, did you read the white paper? I was like, yep, I didn't understand any of it. I want to learn more. He was like, okay, well, I got this complicated book at home. You don't have to understand that either, but just give it a read. Just like stimulate your brain a bit. And it was Mastering Bitcoin by Antonopoulos. And bro, like I'm telling you, as a guy who was like, like I'd lose backups to my computers and stuff, and like I'd just be a user. I'd be the basic user of a computer.
Right.
I never interfaced with a computer or like command line or Linux or open source or like node running or like I didn't even know how the internet worked. I just used it. Like I was kind of your basic computer user. But then when I saw that, I was like, man, this is a combination of like fintech, because like I was trying to get out of traditional finance. I hated my job in the bank, and I wanted to do something cooler, which was like fintech at that point. You know, there were all these apps that were being launched, like
Mm-hmm.
Cash App and Wise, and you know, especially in the UK around London, there were a lot of like startup style fintech companies, and I was like, I wanted to do that until I learned that actually Bitcoin was more badass, more punk, more like underground, and like nobody controlled it. It wasn't a startup. Bitcoin wasn't a startup. It wasn't a corporation. It was an idea. I was like, and it's going to incentivize my learning because number go up, and I can also have my finance kick out of it because I can own it. So it was like everything in one. So I read like Mastering Bitcoin until like the fourth chapter, and I was like, bro, this is turning my brain to slush. Like I I got to learn some basic stuff. So I went back to my buddy 2 weeks later and was like, yeah, I read the white paper, didn't get it. I didn't read Mastering Bitcoin all the way through, definitely didn't get it. But I want some Bitcoin. He was like, okay, so you're trading at the moment, you're trading Bitcoin on a platform, it's called eToro. Do you realize that you don't own Bitcoin? I was like, what do you mean? Like I got my username, I got my password, like I can close positions, I can open positions, I can take profit. He was like, yeah, but that's not actual Bitcoin, right? I was like, yeah, I suppose it is a derivative. He was like, yeah, exactly. If you want to be a Bitcoiner, you have to own some Bitcoin. So that was the point where that was my discovery. That was when the Bitcoiner in me was birthed, you know, like, and to change from that into like my personal life, it was around about then, like my mother passed away a few months before that, and I got some inheritance money. And I was like, well, what am I going to do with my inheritance? I was still traveling, but I didn't want to like burn all my inheritance on Thailand and Bali and hostels and, you know, like just partying it up. I could have partied up for like 2 years, right? Yeah, I could
Nighttime
have partied
preference
up for
shit.
two
Yeah.
years and I could have traveled the
Yeah.
world. It was like, you know, it could have been a nice little break for me. But I was like, man, after 2 years, I just knew it. I projected it all the way through and I was like, I'm going to regret that. I'm going to come back to the UK broke as fuck. And I'm going to have spent inheritance, which is like, for me, it was like disrespect to my mother who'd worked hard for that cash. I was like, I
Yeah.
can't do that.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of millennials do. And I was like, I don't want to do that. But at the same time, I was like, well, where do I put this money? I didn't want to buy a house because I didn't want to get tied down. I knew that investments, they will all take commissions, percentages. I was feeding a system that I didn't believe in. I knew it was full of leeches. I knew whatever would give me a good return was at the base level corrupt. So I was like, I don't want to feed financial corruption. I don't invest in things I don't believe in. So where do I put my money? And it was at that intersection whilst I was learning about Bitcoin and trading on a coffee break, and my buddy was feeding me information about how Bitcoin works, that I actually came into some money and didn't know what to do with it. So the only move I thought about was putting it into Bitcoin. And that's what I did. I put a small amount of inheritance into Bitcoin in like 2017 and obviously rode the crazy price hike and I was like, whoa, this is nuts. And very quickly saw it come back down. But I actually decided to go back to university as well, leave finance and qualify as a teacher. So I knew my investing background was like, you can never make money quickly. Like 3 to 4 years was like a basic investment. So I was like, hey, I'm going back to university for the next 4 years. I'm going to lock in that Bitcoin. I'm going to hold it for 4 years. And when I graduate, it'll be like a graduation gift to myself, and I can gift myself my Bitcoin. I had no idea that Bitcoin worked in 4 year cycles. I had no idea. It was just simply because my degree that I was doing as a teacher was lasting 4 years. But that was like a blessing from Satoshi, right? Stars aligned, money came in at a time when I was curious. I had a low time preference. I had a 4 year project in front of me. I didn't know what to do with cash, and I just saved it. And that for me, I was very lucky. I was so like, well, the stars aligned and things worked out so that I became like a very basic Bitcoiner from day one. I didn't want to sell it. I put it away. I didn't want to touch other shit coins because I didn't have time. I didn't want to have to manage stuff. So I was like stupidly based. You know, I had like the most pleb approach to it. I was like, throw it in there 4 years, don't look at it, and then work hard and study. So that was my genesis as a Bitcoiner, and then the rest is kind of like the next episode. But That's how I became a Bitcoiner, man.
Quick break just to say, if you're enjoying the show and digging what you hear, please consider supporting Discovering Bitcoin by shooting, boosting, sending, or zapping the show some sats. If you're listening via a podcasting 2.0 app such as Fountain, Podverse, or Breeze, it's easier done than said. All you got to do is tap the boost button or set an amount of sats to stream per minute while you're listening. Alternatively, if you want to zap me direct via a lightning address, please send zaps and sats or zaps of sats in support of the show to djdbtc@zoospay.com. Thank you for listening, and thank you for your support. That's brilliant. That's such a cool story, man. You must have like an intuition for this. Like there must be something about your character or personality that just, I mean, the fact that you were so thoughtful in regards to your inheritance from your mum and allocating that mindfully and with, reverence rather than pissing it up the wall is something else. And I guess, is it coincidence that the degree happened to align roughly with the 4-year cycle? And, even then, what are you talking, 17, so the next sort of bull run from that was 21, and that was a pretty muted bull run. And I remember all the memes flying around when it passed the 20k threshold from all those people that had bought the top and just held like psychos, through all that time underwater, and just the jubilation. But there must be something, clearly a fantastic storyteller. I mean, that's your talents are wasted at a fucking call center.
Hey, my average my call handling time was garbage, man. Like, I used to love to chat with people. I felt people's pain over the phone when I was working at the bank. I was like, fuck this. Like, I hated the bank, but I was like the inside guy.
Come on,
They were
Pablo,
like, yo,
get off the
Pablo,
call.
every time my boss would be like, yeah, you're getting really good reviews from the clients. Clients love you. You're getting solutions. Like, you're working it out. But like, buddy, you can't be taking 45 minutes per call. I was like, bro, I love it.
I'm thinking long term, man. I'm looking for retention here. I want people to keep
Yeah,
coming back.
that's it. But no, I think it wasn't. It was like I had like the collective experience. Like, I don't want to sound too esoteric with the shit, but like working in finance, I had my financial situation and reality, but also having talked to thousands and thousands and thousands of people through mortgages, life insurance. I even worked at a gas company for a while in the complaints department. Like, I just felt pain. I felt the collective pain, and I had empathy, but also rage. Like, I had empathy for the victims, but rage against the machine. I always like Rage Against the Machine, like as a band, was like something I always dug into when I was like 14, 15, 16. I was always like, I hated rules at school, and I always had like this. I always wanted to go against the grain a little bit, and I think it was a collective movement of that. I was like, people know that it sucks, the system. People know that the banks are screwing them over, but no one feels they can do anything about it. And I was like, I can. So it was a little bit of a middle finger. And ironically, my mother, who passed away, she used to work at a bank. She worked for HSBC. And I always felt like, they'd, like, the money came from them, but there was like always that fiat exchange of like, like, my mom worked super hard. She was the breadwinner of our house. She came home with the bacon, but she put in so many hours and overtime and stuff. And like, I was like, fuck, like, through fiat, the bank stole my mother's time, and she didn't even get to retire properly. She died really young. And I was like, fuck, man, she was living on a retirement dream, this fiat dream that you'll, like, at 55 be able to live your life now because you escaped and you worked so hard and you tricked the system. I was like, fuck that, man. It was just like it was like this deal that was like always like what do they call it, Faustian deal, like, you give your prime years to work in fiat so that one day when you're old enough they'll let you go with a pat on the back and a pension. And like, she didn't even get that, right? So I get the trickle down of a pension scheme that the bank had promised her, and I was like, I'm gonna take this money and I'm gonna give you the middle fucking finger, because fuck the banks, and like, fuck the system the way it worked. I had a lot of kind of anger for the the system, and I had empathy for all of these people I'd been talking to who were trying to just live their lives, man. So I think that was like internally the motivation. Like the brain was working it out, but the heart was burning with rage. So I think that was a good one, man.
Yeah, you're leading with
Yeah,
the heart, man. I love it.
yeah,
Yeah, it's such a shame, and it's a familiar tale in terms of busting a gut, giving away your prime years in terms of just your energy and your capacity for work, and it's not even 55 anymore. It's like 65, I think, here in Australia. It'll be probably be 95 by the time I get to retirement age, and
yeah,
fuck that, man. Like, why why make more money for other people, and just to get some chump
yeah,
change at the end of it,
yeah,
if you're lucky. It's it's an insane it's an insanely extractive system, full of leeches, parasites, and unconsciously awful people. I don't think that they're necessarily evil or intentionally, awful. It's just that there's not a lot of thought and thinking that goes into this, and you kind of just, most of the time, I guess, go with the flow. And then those people that are in the sort of cognizant of that, it's either beaten out of them, or they do just eventually say fuck this, and try and make it work some other way. I don't know. It's thank God for Bitcoin, man, because it just it's like a big shot of optionality, straight in the arm, straight, where you just like, you don't have to continue doing this nonsense. You can. Here's a couple of choices, but work for it.
yeah. Amen, brother. Because it took me a while to work it out, but after I'd held for a while and I saw it go up a little bit, and then I started when I came out of studies and got a job, then I started earning and I started stacking like a savage because I was like, that's when I got the aspect of fuck you money. And as soon as I got that, I was like,
Mm-hmm.
man, this feels good. And it like incentivized saving again, but like saving on my terms, saving with attitude. It was like the punkest way to be like saving money before was just such a cuck kind of term. Like, I'm going to give my hard-earned money to the bank and I'll give them 5%, but inflation's 7% and I'll pay a fee if I have. It was such a cucked way of just like investing in your future was saving, but Bitcoin like rebirth saving.
For
Yeah,
taxes on
exactly.
the
And all this
interest.
crap you have to do to one day hopefully get it. But like Bitcoin is just, it made saving feel like an act of rebellion. You know what I mean? Which was something I never thought about
That's
before.
so cool.
So once I started saving it as well, I started growing the stack because the idea of saving with Bitcoin is that eventually you have what we call fuck you money. And once you got that, you change as a person. Once you get that, you become sovereign, you become master of your own destiny. You don't have to negotiate on terms anymore. You say, hey, these are my terms. And if you don't like them, I can move somewhere else. I can do something else. Like it's like that meme, like I'm the captain now. And that's it.
Yeah, it just makes disagreeable people even more disagreeable. And it's like a buddy of mine's fan, he was on the pod, Star Fury. He was telling me how he's in like the top. He did that Jordan Peterson personality thing, and he was like in the top 1% of disagreeableness. And I think I got like top 5 or top 3. Can't remember what it was when I did it. And I thought I was pretty disagreeable, but bro is like even more. And then you compound that with Bitcoin, and it's just like you're basically at that point an intolerant like asshole. But he's like the most pleasant person ever. It's funny because Bitcoiners are very generous and friendly and helpful, and they're very optimistic folk. But as you say, like, they're just fed up with bullshit, and it's like, now you have a firm foundation from which to stand on. I mean, gosh, you work at Bull Bitcoin, and if Francis isn't one of the most disagreeable people I think I've ever seen on Twitter, I don't know who is. But like, he's built this incredible company, he's got all of these incredible products and services, and he lives his life down, well, I guess in Costa Rica or whatever. But my point is that you feel that disagreeableness come through on his tweets, and you know he's intolerant of nonsense. You just see that, but at the same time, just incredibly insightful and generous with his insight and what he does. It's a funny thing. Like I just find that paradigm, or that paradox rather, amongst Bitcoiners to be really fascinating. The idea that you can just be such a disagreeable human being and intolerant of so much, and yet be so willing and able to go that extra mile to be helpful, to provide value, and yeah, demonstrate proof of work, I guess, which is kind of where your story's
Mm.
at.
Yeah, I was having an interesting conversation with a Bitcoiner like yesterday about this, and I think in terms of like personality types, there were certain personality types that gravitated towards Bitcoin. There were certain personality types that were necessary for Bitcoin to succeed. There were certain behaviors and way of defending and protecting and building Bitcoin which was necessary. But right now in 2024, where we're at and how Bitcoin has thrived and how game theory is playing out, there's two sides to me, right? There was like the kind of Rage Against the Machine listening, like fuck this system, like I want to destroy the banks. But also there's a side of me which is like I'm an educator. Like I love working with young people and I love teaching and I love creating connection and I love sharing my time. But if you're stealing my time and if you're breaking my connections, I'll get angry. But as soon as I put myself on a Bitcoin standard, I found that my time opened up and the amount of time I can spend with people and making connections started to thrive again. And that it's kind of like the walled garden. You know what I mean? Like all of these Bitcoiners, when you get to meet them and like you talk about things outside of Bitcoin, you realize that they have so many like passions and so many things they love and care about, and they appreciate beauty in so many different aspects of their life. But it's the walled garden. They have to protect and they have to build something that's very robust around them, which is their Bitcoin kind of like a citadel, if you will. Like they set that up first as a defense against fiat, but then within that they build the most beautiful things. And I think we're at the change now where those walled gardens, we can now go and see what people are doing. So, like for example, Francis, he's living out there in Bitcoin Jungle, which is one of Bull Bitcoin's. We help out Bitcoin Jungle. It's a circular economy in UVita, and Bull Bitcoin as a contribution. We take no fees, we make no profit on it, but we bring a lot of the back end and the resources necessary so that it can economically work. But Francis is out there enjoying fresh fruit. He's out there enjoying people who are starting families, building community, grounding his feet in the sand and connecting with nature and seeing the seasons go by. And so now he's worked so hard to build up that walled system. He's also working on that internal garden of rebuilding community and connecting with people and living the difference that without Bitcoin wouldn't be possible. So I think we're at that sea change now. Like adopting Bitcoin, the event I just went to, there are things within Bitcoin which are now flourishing more than the developers and more than the on-chain and more than the mining, in my opinion. And that's things like education and art. I really feel that's like where Bitcoin development is now. It's grown up, it's maturing, and it's becoming also more like I wouldn't say empathetic or something, but there's more like there's more like desire for connection and sharing and collaboration now. Because a lot of we're standing on the shoulders of giants, me and you both, right? There are so many people who worked so hard to get Bitcoin to where it is now. And that's why it wasn't possible for me to contribute to Bitcoin previously. I wasn't a technically minded programmer guy. I was customer service. That's how I first got involved. I wanted to help people learn Bitcoin, change passwords, change addresses. So I went back to the call centers. But essentially, I'm a teacher, and it's taken a while for that kind of culture to flourish within Bitcoin. But I believe it's here now, and I think the personality types that can access Bitcoin, it's widening. Bitcoin's becoming more welcoming. Bitcoin's becoming, a lot more diverse in terms of personality types now. A lot of the founding founders of Bitcoin had to be a certain type of person. But out of the projects that I've seen, like family-run businesses, like artists, like people who care about other things, Bitcoin's now enabling them to take more time to dedicate their efforts towards their project. And mine is education, so I can finally teach again, which is great. Like Bitcoin made saving possible again. Bitcoin for me has made education possible again. I rage quit fiat education because of the COVID restrictions. And now here I am back teaching again, but through Bitcoin. So that side of me, which wants relationship, which wants connection, which wants people to share and best practices and knowledge, is now possible thanks to Bitcoin. So I see it as like a maturation um, of Bitcoin. And I think more and more personality types are coming to the space now, and they have their place now. Maybe 5, 10 years ago, definitely didn't have their place, but I'm seeing lots of different types of people join Bitcoin and finding their niche within Bitcoin and being able to contribute. So I see like a cultural sea change a little bit. Still Bitcoin only, still self custody, but hey, if you want to like work in healthcare, you can be a Bitcoiner. If you want to teach, you can be a Bitcoiner. If you want to be an artist, you can be a Bitcoiner. You don't have to be an angry guy behind the keyboard. It was necessary for a long time, but no longer. I think thanks to those efforts, we're breaking through to like a whole new realm of what a Bitcoiner is.
Yeah, I agree. I was trying to shill a little bit of corn to someone who was playing an open mic a couple of weeks ago, and there was two of them actually, and they're really good artists and really good musicians, and they were playing some originals, and it was cool. And I've been talking to the owner of the bar about Bitcoin for a little while, and he still doesn't quite get it, which is a bit irritating to be honest. But these two musicians, I was talking to them about zapping and Noster and Wave Lake and Fountain and all this sort of stuff, and trying to sort of. It was interesting because I don't normally speak about Bitcoin to people I don't know, and I just sort of felt compelled, to try and explain that doing the open mic is cool and doing the Instagram thing and all that stuff, but the game has changed. You can now actually earn money from like people literally all around the world sending you money for listening to your song. You can piss Spotify off to an extent, and it just fell on deaf ears. Like I just realized halfway through the conversation that I was attempting to have, that I was that person in 1995 talking to them about sending a letter
Mm,
on the internet, and it was like, okay, I got to reframe how I do this in terms of educating these two musicians, which I really really liked and wanted to see them continue playing, but because they're having a whinge to me about how they have to be side hustlers doing content creation, and how Spotify screws them over with streaming and all this sort of stuff, and it's really difficult to make money as a musician nowadays. And it's like, well, it's always been hard to make money as a musician, but you can make it a little easier on yourself and introduce sort of the orange pill. But they switched off. You could just hear their ears just kind of like, oh, okay, this guy's just talking to me about something weird on the internet. And maybe it's like the context, maybe it's the place that I'm at, and so maybe those individuals, they're just not as receptive. Whereas I can imagine if you're having that same conversation with someone in, I don't know, somewhere in Canada, particularly, I mean, God, the Canadians, man, they are just ahead of the game in terms of what they build over the last few years. There's some incredible something in the water up there in terms of the output of Canadians relative to, I think, anywhere else, to be honest. But that context of, maybe it's like a population thing, maybe it's just the type of people, who knows. But you're right, there is a shift in terms of the comfortableness. Like a couple of years ago, there's no way I would have had that conversation. I would have just kept it to myself, you know. Whereas I feel a little bit more comfortable having that conversation about Bitcoin, at least introducing the idea to strangers, and not feeling completely concerned with, I guess, privacy or that sort of thing. But it's funny, I still was met with relatively deaf ears, and maybe this particular place that I'm in, there's a bit of
Yeah,
work to do.
yeah. I don't know, like I think what we need in all these different realms, like Bitcoin artists, are becoming like examples of how you don't have to be a struggling artist. Like the poor musician or the poor poet or the poor artist, like they've just become like culturally accepted. But if we see them as being fiat related issues, maybe they're just poor fiat artists and poor fiat musicians and poor fiat poets. But maybe we can make these people self-sustaining Bitcoiner musicians, self-sustaining Bitcoiner poets, self-sustaining Bitcoiner artists, where they have their time back and they put their energy into creating beautiful things that our civilization needs. And because they moved onto a Bitcoin standard,
Yes.
we can finally give them the value that we all know they're contributing. We know these people are contributing. Like humans are made to do certain things, not just work, but like creation is one of the higher planes of existence. Like if you can create as part of your day to day, dedicating your life to creation is something that should be rewarded. And with the fiat system, it never can be because we're just stuck in this kind of perpetual grind. So we accept that reality. And it sounds like your friends there talking about Spotify and side hustles. Like it sounds like they've accepted the fiat reality. It's not being a musician that makes you poor. It's being a fiat cook that makes you poor, right? You can be a well-off we're on the cusp of this movement, and I can't wait to see the next kind of role models, or like the next kind of like innovators or leaders. We've had them in Bitcoin, from businesses to finance to developers, but there are artists that I can name like Madex, like Flo Montoya, like people that I've met at like Fractal Encrypt, who are leading artists who are finally making good money. Musicians, it's on the way. Like I listened to Roger 9000 at the after party. He makes like Bitcoin related songs, but he's on a Bitcoin standard and he sees his number go up. So I can't wait until there are all of these people that like your friends can look up to, being like, "Hey, that guy made it on a Bitcoin standard. Maybe I can." But it takes trailblazers. I think is the word I'm looking for. Like cultural trailblazers. But I know it's on its way. The platforms have been there, like Wave Lake and Nostra and Zapstream, and you can build anything you want. And if you can't build, somebody's already built it for you. You can now platform yourself on a Bitcoin standard, whatever type of artist you want to be. And I think it's no longer the case that we should accept that artists should be poor people in our society. I think that's a fiat related problem. I don't think it's a culturally related problem. I think we can redefine how these contributors can play a role in society and finally give them the value that they deserve. But it wasn't possible pre-Bitcoin, but we'll see it. We'll see it happen over the next few years. I'm more than certain.
No, I agree, man. It just takes a little bit of will and a bit of evolution of consciousness, in order to.
Or the pain point as well, right? Like this is what I try and do as like an evangelist. Like I'd like to think that we can save people before they hit their pain point. Like some people disagree with me. Some people say you need to go through a hard time to be able to see the benefits of Bitcoin. You need to get bankrupt. You need to get wrecked. You need to lose your coins. You need to go shitcoin trading. I'd like to think that I can open up avenues before that, but it's mainly, that's what I try and do. That's kind of one of my quests. So maybe your musician friends need to get cancelled via YouTube, or like their song sued for infringement copyright on Spotify or whatever. Maybe they need to go through that process. I'd like to wish no, but maybe the pain is necessary to then transition onto a Bitcoin standard. But it's happening right before our eyes, and I'm just very happy to see it play out. There's like a cultural game theory as well playing out here as well.
Oh, most definitely. I mean, you got Joe Martin, who's killing it on that sort of in that space, and God, there's another. Can't remember her name. They played in Nashville. That's the kind of stuff that, man, if you were just a little bit more switched on, I mean, you could just see that happening and be like,
Mm-hmm.
shit, let's do that here. Anyway, it is what it is. How has discovering Bitcoin
Oh boy.
changed you?
Uh, it's been like a culmination of stuff. Like you were saying about Canada and like Canadians building stuff. There's been like other events that have also shaped me at the same time. So it's hard to know if it was Bitcoin or if it was like other events. Um, I mean, like Bitcoin showed up at the right time for me, and that was pre-pandemic. I couldn't have imagined how the pandemic would have played out for me had I not had Bitcoin. But the pandemic definitely played a big part in shaping who I am today. Just with my like vision of what the state is or isn't, and how I see the state and centralized education and centralized healthcare and centralized power. So that did play a large part. But Bitcoin was kind of like a point of where I could attach myself, because there's a set of rules without rulers. So I could always get on board with that. And I think just having like a bedrock, like a foundational layer on which I could like start to realign time, work, friendships, travel. It kind of became like a grid on which I could map out my new existence. So it's given me a lot more confidence in my own power and my own abilities. It's given me like a reassurance that I can do what I want to do, but on my own terms without much compromise. Um, it's led me to imagine a lot more as well and become more hopeful about the future. It's allowed me to dream and see that things are getting better rather than this pessimistic cultural tendency, especially as being a Brit. Like, like, oh, how you doing? Oh, we're holding on in. People ask me now, how you doing? I'm like, I'm thriving. We already won. I already feel like we already won. Um, so I kind of have all of those
Awesome.
feelings within me now that previously I'd be like, how's this going to work out? Like, what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to overcome? And will I ever see a change? And all of those questions have been slowly answered and are being answered in front of me right now to a point where I feel like very blessed and very at peace with what's to come, which is really nice. Like it's something I wouldn't have
That's
thought,
so
but
good.
it's everything that I think people wish for. So if anybody's listening to this, like being like, hey, it sounds really cultish and everything, yeah, if you jump in from day one, it's not going to happen overnight. This is a change which started back in 2013 when my buddy at a party was like, "Hey, this weird internet money for transactions." And here we are nearly like 10 years later, and it's slowly defining or helping me define myself. It is a slow change, but it's definitely a very positive one, and it's something that I'm very thankful for, and I thank Satoshi first and foremost. But then all the other Bitcoiners along the way who've helped me get to where I am, and now my contribution is to help as many new Bitcoiners get to where I am or where they need to go. I want to definitely. It's like a legacy thing and a kind of pay it forward kind of culture. So it inspires me when I just even mentioning it now. It makes me want to like get to work and develop more resources for people and help other people escape what they already know is a broken system and give them something to hope for.
I was listening to Neville Goddard the other day. There's a book he wrote in the 40s, 50s, something like that, called The Power of Awareness. And I sort of discovered him going down this Steiner rabbit hole sort of thing. But anyway, one of the things that stuck out to me, I wrote this quote down while I was listening: imagination is the only redemptive power in the universe. And basically, the notion that imagination creates reality, and that the reason as human beings we can imagine is because we have consciousness, and the more we work on that consciousness, we can cultivate, an elevated sense of cognition through thinking, through imagination, and you can imagine the future, the future that you want, the future, your future self, your future life, all of these things, and it's a very hopeful way of being in the world which is almost untenable on a fiat standard because you almost by default are like trapped in the hamster wheel, and you have to just jump on every day, spin around and around and around, and then get thrown off at 55, 65, whatever it is, with maybe something in your pocket to try and last you until you're dead. And that's a really depressing, shitty way of being in the world. And it thieves you, it robs you, or it may not even thieve you. It may just like suppress, which is just as bad, really, of your imagination. It inflates your imagination away, if you put it like that. Maybe it's 2% per annum, and so you compound over time, and you just become this husk of a person that once used to like to write songs, or once used to like to create tables, out of wood, or work with your hands in some particular way, or write, or whatever it is, paint, anything, anything artistic and creative. That notion of creation is so core and central to being a human being, and fiat just sort of robs people of that imagination. And therefore, if imagination creates reality, as this Goddard guy was talking about, you kind of get robbed of reality. And then you plug in this Bitcoin life, this Bitcoin standard, this punk ethos of just being able to save your time and energy through time and space. You can reimagine. You can become more imaginative. You can create a better reality for yourself. And what you just said then is like one of the core reasons why I love doing this podcast so much, is because there's people out there that have this desire, innate impulse to contribute something to the world, but in the same way they're contributing to themselves. There's a sense of meaning and authenticity there that is kind of innate in, I guess, people like yourself. And I see it a lot amongst early doors Bitcoiners. We're doing 101 episodes now, and it's a core theme throughout, I think. And it's like you've got permission to imagine, to create your reality, because, as you were talking about with the walled garden, you've kind of set your defenses up. You've got your fuck you money. You've injected that sense of optionality into your life. And now you can go out and you can create and you can share and you can educate and you can do all these wonderful things that contributes real value to other people, and also yourself too. Like, you're being of service to others, and in doing that, you're getting so much back in return.
Amen. For sure. I really like that. No, that's exactly it. Like, there's definitely that aspect of, it's like a non-violent punk movement towards self-sovereignty, and then when you're self-sovereign, well, you fall back on kind of like the will of the soul, which is those things like, deep down, I think, if you're not burdened by the fiat system, if you manage to you mentioned the word permission there. If you give yourself the permission to become, like, through Bitcoin, it'll give you that permission. You can enable yourself to move forward. Then you can get down to like the core desires of the soul. And like, I know mine is like teaching. Like, I really like it. Some people like caring for others. They wanna help people, whether they be sick or they need assistance. Some people have a core caring desire. Some people want to create. Some people want to learn. Some people want to discover. Some people want to invent. But these are like the core cries of the soul. And unfortunately, they're shackled down, they're burdened by fiat, and the key holders are what we call the time thieves. These people who hold the keys are the time thieves. And it's Madex who says, who's one of our artists. Well, he's not one of our artists. He's the artist, and he works a lot with Bull Bitcoin. He always says death to time thieves. Um, and it is that, like, once you remove the time thieves from your life, then you can become unshackled and go back to these core cries of the soul, which is so much a better existence. And I think that's what all people feel, that kind of inner chagrin of like the tortured soul of like, what am I, the human condition or whatever. We can flourish. We really can. Like, we just have to kind of adjust a couple things, and Bitcoin does that. It just realigns a little bit the system so we can get back on track. It's not like Bitcoin isn't the destination. It is a vehicle. Like, I don't believe like, hey, we just want hyper Bitcoinization and that's it. Like, I'm interested in what comes after. But I do believe, like, I've been at the event adopting Bitcoin, and after that, I was like, yeah, there is a drive to adopt Bitcoin, but then what really excites me is what happens after that. Like, and that's why I always liked Max Kaiser's idea of this Renaissance 2.0 that he was talking about in the early days. I was listening to Max Kaiser on RT News, like back when I was in the UK a lot. He was talking about Bitcoin, and I always liked his approach of like, this will be a Renaissance 2.0. There have been episodes in civilization where art and beauty were put to the forefront, and things were prioritized, which aren't being so now. But I'd love to see that in my lifetime. I'm not sure if that's possible, but if I can set it up for future generations, well, all be it. Like, I think we thrive in those conditions. So hopefully Bitcoin is the vehicle towards that destination.
What does Bitcoin mean to you?
Oh, bro. It's like a rebalancing. Bitcoin, like, is right about now. It feels like a rebalancing. It feels like justice. It feels like the scales have always been tipped against us, and there's always been this like power imbalance and this unfair distribution of power, and it's generational. It's been passed down for a long time. It's inherited and it's systematic, and Bitcoin basically rebalances. It feels like justice to me. So yeah, I think that's what it is. Yeah.
Justice. I love that. That's cool, man. And balance, rebalancing everything. That is, I think, really crucial. Particularly, what comes after is so important to have that sense of balance in society, rather than have it sort of out of whack with, as you were talking about, or what Madex talks about with the time thieves. It's imbalance. The fiat system is imbalanced, and that is not the way of the universe. That is not how the world works. The universe is harmony. That's how it works. You know.
Yeah.
Pablo,
Amen.
thank you so much for spending some scarce time, fun, and energy telling us the tale of how you discovered Bitcoin. This is a rip that we could have gone for more than like 2 hours, 3 hours, I reckon. But just I want to hear more.
Stay in touch, man. I've enjoyed every second of this conversation. Like, I always feel like just sitting down with other Bitcoiners, having these conversations, like it's an evolution of thought as well. So I thank you for helping nourish this and bringing about the situation and giving your time and driving the conversation. It's been very stimulating. And to anybody out there listening, if anybody wants to reach out, you can always reach me at Pablo at Bull Bitcoin. And I'll be happy to help anybody along this quest that we're all walking together. So happy to have you along with us, brother. Thanks for your time.
My prediction, I think this is what we're seeing, like in real time, is Bitcoin's adoption will continue also for people who are not particularly interested in Bitcoin, or perhaps even don't like it, just because it is such a big advance over the previous form of money. It's so much better than fiat.
Hello, I am Cody Ellingham, and this is The Transformation of Value, a place for thinkers and builders, where together we explore freedom, energy, and creativity through the lens of Bitcoin. In this episode, I am joined by Dr. Anthony Jeffries, co-author of the book Decrypting Money, a Comprehensive Introduction to Bitcoin, which gives an excellent technical overview of Bitcoin and includes a foreword by world chess champion and chairman of the Human Rights Foundation, Garry Kasparov. We talk about Anthony's background in automotive R&D and how a systems design approach translates over into Bitcoin thinking. We also explore the interesting interplay between the different participants in the Bitcoin network, namely cypherpunks, libertarians and speculators, and how together the push and pull of these groups leads to Bitcoin becoming more anti-fragile. Now this show is supported by you. My vision is to make the transformation of value into something that we can take with us into the future. If you want to help me grow this show, please consider making a donation either through my website or by tipping directly to the show's Bitcoin wallet, or otherwise just share this episode with a friend who you think may enjoy it. If you have any questions or feedback, I would love to hear from you. You can always email me at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com and I will get back to you. Otherwise, on to the show. Anthony, thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Cody, for the invitation on your show.
Yeah, no worries at all. I really enjoyed your book that you co-wrote
Thanks.
with a couple of others, Decrypting Money, A Comprehensive Introduction to Bitcoin. Thank you very much for sending the copy. And
Most welcome.
I mean, I thought it was really awesome. For me, as a seasoned Bitcoiner, it sort of gave quite an interesting take. It gave me some new mental models, actually. I found for looking at a few things which were really interesting. But I guess starting off, if it's okay, Anthony, maybe we could just go a little bit into your background, and then we can talk a little bit about the book, if that's okay, please.
Yeah, sure. Although I'm interested to hear how it changed your mental models, but we can certainly talk about that later if you like.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, essentially my background from a sort of educational, professional direction. Firstly, so I studied maths at university, and then went in the direction of engineering into mechanical engineering, in particular fluid mechanics and fluid dynamics calculations. And that led me to ultimately to the automotive industry. So I spent many years working in the German automotive industry, doing engineering calculations, in particular with heat management in the car and for cooling systems, and for other situations where fluids come into play, for example, driving through fords or bodies of water and various other different things. So yeah, my background is essentially automotive engineering, and the link to Bitcoin there is actually I came to Bitcoin through a friend of mine who I met in the automotive industry. We were firstly colleagues. We worked together making new ways to calculate heat flows in exhausts, and he was the one who he discovered Bitcoin for himself, and very soon after, in a series of very long telephone calls, he explained to me why he thought Bitcoin was such an interesting idea, such a groundbreaking and novel creation, and that sent me down researching it more and got me into it.
Yeah.
And he Christian Handel, also from down under, but Australia. We've done several different projects together in that field, and he was the one who introduced me to the co-authors, or at least one of the co-authors. He introduced me to Marco Krohn and Marco Strang back in the day, and then they in turn introduced me to the fourth co-author, Zoran.
Yeah. So you were both engineers, so you're Christian as well?
That's right, yeah. We're both mechanical engineers, and we were both at that time in automotive. Yeah.
Do you think, Anthony, there's some sort of connection between people who work in that practical side and the connection with reality that you get with engineering, mechanical engineering, that lends itself to grasping Bitcoin potentially?
Sure. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever you're doing in your organization, in your company, if you're an auto manufacturer, you have to have a thing which works. You cannot fake it. A car has to work. It has to have, has to go forward. It has to stop. It has to turn, and so on. And that, of course, engineers therefore have a very must have a very strong connection to reality. understand reality very well in order that the car that they produce actually does what it's supposed to.
Yeah.
And similar for the thinking, which is quite rightly quite prevalent in Bitcoin, as well. You have the dominant form of money is not really acting well as a form of money. So you have a form of money which is, for example, freely printed. And then as an engineer, you look at it and you study the properties, you study what money should do, and then you compare the dominant form of Bitcoin to this new emerging form of money, and you notice the differences, and you say, well, this is obviously a better way of doing it, just like steam engine is a less advanced means of having a propulsion in a car than a petrol engine. So,
yeah, sort of a progression of technology that
yeah,
sort of works towards better systems, more efficient systems. And I'm
yeah.
also struck by the great foreword that you had in the book by world chess champion and chairman of the Human Rights Foundation, Garry Kasparov, which, as you know, chess is a rules-based game, and there's a deep level of game theory and understanding of these systems and the way you can approach it. So to read Gary's thoughts, very pro-Bitcoin, very insightful on the nature of Bitcoin and the bigger piece, I thought that was very interesting as well.
Yeah.
How did you connect with Gary?
He's a friend of Marco Streng. So Marco Streng met him at some point. Marco Streng was doing many different meetings, and he was the one who established the contact with Garry Kasparov. And Marco did one or two things with Garry Kasparov in a business sense, and in the course of that, then Marco asked Gary to write a foreword for us.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting, and coming back to the book, Decrypting Money, for me, it was really interesting. As I said before, it gives a brief history of money, as well as some of the projects that preceded Bitcoin, as well as an excellent technical introduction, which I thought, for me, having studied this for a while, it still was quite fresh, and there was some great graphics in there as well that helped explain some of the cryptographic primitives that underpin Bitcoin. And so I thought it was great for someone who's maybe new to Bitcoin, as well as someone who's been in it for a while. But there was one thing that really stood out to me, and this was actually in the introduction, and it was just a little piece, but the way you talk about the three main groups that engage with Bitcoin, which is the original cypherpunks, the libertarians, and the speculators. And I wanted to dive into this topic a little bit, because I think there's something interesting in how these three groups of people sort of interact and sort of push and pull the system of Bitcoin into, I guess, where it is today is a very robust, broader system. So I guess maybe picking that topic up a little bit, I mean, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on that, please.
Well, the cypherpunk strand is where it all comes from. I mean, you had back in the 90s this whole, where Adam Back was also involved, this whole idea of having strong cryptography being able to use to give you a degree of privacy, and also to make it accessible to the layman. So especially with the introduction of this public key cryptography, of course later used in Bitcoin, anyone could use a type of cryptography which would be, as far as we know, unbreakable to the most powerful secret service and secret service agencies in the world. So yeah, I mean, you had this group of people who were interested in technology and interested in the application of technology to enhance their privacy. And of course, for them, it's quite natural to want a form of money which corresponds to that. And so they are, of course, very ready to take up something like Bitcoin, and when Bitcoin came along, in order to that this sort of form of human interaction, transaction, transferring value, is being able to be done both digitally and in a much more, not completely private way, of course. And transactions are, of course, written on the blockchain, but at least in a way which is cryptographically secured and also permissionless as well as pseudonymous. So, I mean, these people were essentially primed to take Bitcoin as soon as it got out there. Then you have the libertarians. I mean, libertarians, they prefer, in particular, libertarians will prefer private money. I mean, we go into the book, you'll have seen we discuss various periods in history where the money was not issued by a government or government-linked authority or an authority authorized that exclusively by the government, but rather by private banks, and there were competing monies in the same economy. And this then again, Bitcoin is also going to appeal to them, that you don't have a state currency but rather a private currency. Also can compete with other private currencies in the market. And then you have, I mean, speculators there. Speculators, I would say, a little bit like they're not, maybe not so much interested in some particular principles. I mean, speculators are essentially to use their financial resources to work for them. I mean, if you've made money and you have some capital, of course, it's of interest to use that capital in such a way that it reproduces itself. And the better you can do that, or better to do that, you're looking for different instruments in order to accomplish that goal. And Bitcoin, compared to the dollar as a fairly high volatility asset, is able to offer that to speculators, these high price fluctuations. So, I mean, how they all interact, I would say, just how Bitcoin works, it leads one group into the other. If you're a committed cypherpunk, and then you come into Bitcoin, well, Bitcoin lends itself to, because of what it is, to a libertarian form of economics. So then you get interested in, you may not pay much attention to economics or nor on the side, but then it leads you to get more interested in this. Or you buy a Bitcoin and then you see, okay, the value is fluctuating. This is interesting for me, for my own personal finances, and not just necessarily some interesting idea or concept, but this can actually make a change to my personal financial situation. So,
yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, the cypherpunks write code and they keep us private from the state, and then the libertarians keep the money sound, and then the speculators pump the number. And I think there's something in there which I think reflects some of the other decentralization that is prevalent in Bitcoin, and which I feel it's a little bit hard to articulate, but I feel like it's just another one of those examples of it being quite broad, and it doesn't fall into these narrow scopes, which I think are easy to fall into, where you maybe focus, say, on the technology side of something, or you focus on just one aspect. But there's the certain decentralization that means that even though you could consider speculators, some of the traditional funds and things, as being very statist potentially, and kind of against maybe what the cypherpunks had in mind, or the libertarians for that matter. There's something about the way they all sort of push and pull together, or push and pull even in different directions. But the act of that leads to this anti-fragile outcome, and Bitcoin kind of continues going. And there's something quite powerful about that, which I was certainly impressed upon by reading about your explanation of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I think that also kind of spreads as well. I mean, you mentioned, for example, how it would appeal to engineers, and I think in various different fields, you can see how aspects of Bitcoin also has this attraction. I think, for example, legal profession, for example, they will then see, okay, you have some you have firstly a community which can resolve conflicts in a decentralized way. You don't have one court which stands above everyone determining this will be the way, and you also have rules being both defined and achieving consensus in a decentralized way. So a lawyer can also take some inspiration how a system could work in a different way. So I think it can appeal to many different people, and then historians as well. Historians can also see the parallels between having a hard money in the past, and having these private monies in the past, and then the scarcity and also the emissionless nature of Bitcoin. And yeah, I mean, these people then entering the field, as I say, then they can, all the other aspects are there, and they can explore that further, and it all, as you say, as it's mixed together.
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly struck as well by, I mean, there's a lot of technical detail and you can really geek out on a lot of this, and I enjoy that myself. But when you do bring in the fact that there is this speculation element, and even though there maybe is some people who see the likes of the large funds or BlackRock, these kinds of organizations purchasing Bitcoin, being involved with the ETFs and all of that, there is still something there that is powering the engine and is contributing to the overall thing, and you can't plan for that from the beginning. So even though it is an engineered solution and the rules have been set out, the way that it unfolds and the emergent nature of it is very interesting, and it seems like it's just in this Goldilocks zone where everything was just right, or at least good enough to sort of start off,
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I mean, I mean, the fact that it has changed, I mean, of course it hasn't developed since 2009, but the fact that the fundamental principles have held for so long is really a tribute to the creator of Bitcoin, to Satoshi.
Yeah, there was certainly some foresight there, though I do wonder sometimes, I mean, that was before my time, but, has there been maybe a change in attitude as it's become more broad? Because certainly the cypherpunks were the first, and then the libertarians came in, and then it took a few years for speculators to really get involved, and I wonder sometimes what that progression looked like, and maybe what it was like during the early days. I imagine it was maybe a bit more esoteric, a bit more technical, and that was important in the beginning. But then once it started to monetize and there started to be speculation, all of that work and that technical work sort of paid off, because the system could handle people getting involved and the thing scaling up and increasing in value and that sort of thing. And I mean, not to say, I mean, there were certainly some challenges and questions asked about the scaling thing early on, which I don't know if you have any comments on, but just the way that unfolded as well spoke to this decentralized governance model, which was also very important, still is very important to Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, certainly at the start you had very much the impression that it was really an experiment, and there was the degree to which it's established itself and also gone over to and had these interfaces with the conventional financial system. That, of course, was not the case back then. It was really quite decoupled from every other system, and also the general perception of it was, you still of course have strains of it today of the skepticism and all the various different misconceptions of Bitcoin, and that was, I would say, fair degree stronger back then. But there was also this, I would say there was also at the moment the confidence level that it will really be there for the long term, the very long term, is a lot higher. Back then it was clear, it was, especially to the people who were convinced by it, that it was something quite new and quite a step above what had come before, but not this confidence. Yes, this is really going to be the thing which will be around for a long time and will be the thing which will come through. I mean, and you had that also, especially like you then had the phase in 2017 where you had a lot of altcoins. You had a lot of again, going back to speculators, a lot of altcoins trading, and then this whole concept of the flippening, this idea that Ether would at some point overtake in market capitalization Bitcoin, and there was this idea that you could have either have Bitcoin supplanted by something technically superior. And I would say this is also, at least speaking today, as of 2024, this has also subsided somewhat in Bitcoin, because it's had this dominance as a form of digital money, of digital gold, for so long. It's built, I wouldn't say an impregnable position, but not a very, very strong lead against any potential competitors.
Yeah. And it's interesting, again, coming back to this engineering background of yours, I'm wondering if you can see any analogies with, say, technical developments in engineering, automotive, or whatever it happens to be, and the way those sort of are taken up by the industry? Because often change can feel like it's quite slow, or maybe change gets taken in a very narrow scope and the broader impacts of something are not fully appreciated, especially by incumbent companies. So, I mean, do you see any sort of crossover? And I'm thinking in terms of automotive, you've got the whole EV revolution, you've got things happening around the idea of transport, etc., that maybe don't get fully appreciated, or it took a long time for people to get up to speed. Do you see any connection between those?
Well, I think what we see and what we will see is similar. I mean, similar to automotive, cars are the dominant form of personal transportation just because they are so useful, and you see it being taken up by people. People drive who are either indifferent to cars or actively don't like cars. I mean, my girlfriend does not like driving, especially in the night time, but the car is just such a useful thing in many ways that she has a car and she uses it. She just gets on with it. And you see that with many like successful other technologies as well. I mean, like smartphones, for example. Well, a lot of people back in the sort of late 00 years or early 2010s, they were quite skeptical about smartphones, but eventually, essentially everyone got a smartphone just because they are so useful. And I think you will have my prediction. I think this is what we're seeing, like in real time, is Bitcoin's adoption will continue also for people who are not particularly interested in Bitcoin or perhaps even don't like it, just because it is such a big advance over the previous form of money. It's so much better than fiat, and people will see that other people holding Bitcoin, or it can be organizations as well, other organizations, other governments, other companies who hold Bitcoin have such an advantage from it. It becomes so compelling they do it even if they are not particularly interested or even actively dislike it.
Yeah. And I guess the book gives a really good history of money. It also gives an overview of the technical aspects of Bitcoin. But I guess if we were to partake in some speculation of our own, I think what I'm very interested in is maybe some of your thoughts around some of the different possibilities that this presents, because there is maybe a history of study of commodity money and what kind of digital gold would mean in a hyper-Bitcoinized future, for example, but that still is relying on our previous models of, say, the golden era of banking in the 19th century or earlier, and maybe doesn't quite take into account sort of how things have changed so much with information technology. So painting a picture for what you see in the future, I'm really interested to dive into that in terms of Bitcoin, Anthony.
Well,
putting you on the spot.
Of course, I'm quite optimistic on Bitcoin. Otherwise, I wouldn't have written the book and had my other involvement with it. Well, as I said previously, I think adoption will just increase and essentially have the situation where everyone is able to take advantage of what Bitcoin has to offer. So on a straightforward sense, you have the fact that you can transact so much easily. You have much less friction with than that which you have with the conventional banking system, especially if you're wanting to send money abroad. You have also as individuals, as families, as organizations, as companies, and as people like Michael Saylor have been talking about, you have the ability to save in money. At the moment, you cannot save in fiat money. You'll lose the purchasing power if you do that on the long term. With Bitcoin as the dominant form of money, you'll have money which is absolutely scarce, and therefore you'll be able to plan for the future better, because you know that the Bitcoin which you hold will not be inflated due to the fact that someone else controls the supply of it. So this allows you to, if you're a family and you wanted to prepare for building a house or for your children's education or for other big expenses, you'll be able to do that a lot more easily. And then on the flip side, you have, of course, the government will have some constraints which you do not have. I mean, of course, states print money because it's in their interest to do so. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it, and they will have to think a lot more carefully about how they spend the money. They will not have this option to either directly print money or to issue debt based on the fact that they are in a position to repay the debt in a currency which they can print. And so governments will have, they will have to be a lot more careful and a lot more thoughtful about what they're spending money on. I think this will lead pressure to things like more efficiency in government. They will essentially not be able to afford inefficient practices as they would today. And there's many funny examples. You could spend a long time talking about it. One funny thing you have in Germany is like there's various aspects of the government still using fax machines. I think you also still have it in Japan. Well, if you're in even a fairly traditional part of private industry, you haven't seen a fax machine for 20 years. So, that's just a fairly jocular example, but of course there's many examples where you have a state spending which is probably not efficient and could be improved, and this discipline which you have may change things there.
Yeah, well, just pulling on that, because I think most people would appreciate that argument that it changes that dynamic with the state and money, and I think that's clear to all of us. But pulling on the mechanism a little bit further, because this idea of adoption, and it just sort of happens and it continues, potentially gradually, then suddenly, as many people say, is I guess one way of looking at it. But I'm also really interested in how these kind of ecosystems collide, because Bitcoin really works best when it's in its own world. Bitcoin natively works extremely well. It's extremely easy to use, but you always come into issues when you're trying to touch the fiat system, and those on-ramps and those off-ramps are always the issue, and that's where most people are. And I just wonder, again, it's a little bit speculative, but sort of where these two worlds meet and how they kind of coexist, because they really seem like there's one argument that perhaps Bitcoin is sort of on the side and it's sort of sucking value from the fiat system and just growing bigger and bigger. But there's another idea that maybe they are symbiotic and fiat continues to be used as a payment system because, Gresham's law, you spend the bad money and you save the good money. And there ends up being some sort of US dollar dominance or something like that, where we're all spending US dollars, but we're all saving Bitcoin, at least in the midterm until something else happens. Could you paint a picture of sort of what you think could happen there, or what the different scenarios may be?
Well, obviously, I would say it's at least premature. Maybe who knows what will happen in the far future, but I think in the near term, I think it's a mistake to underestimate fiat as well. Sure, for the person in power, it's very easy for him to create money. It's an act of fiat. But these people with this power really do have a lot of power. They have a lot of power. They've taken a huge fraction of the GDP of all the economies in which they operate. In the case of the United States, they have enormous military power and a whole raft of other tools of power also at the disposal, from going also into sort of the whole cultural side and media influence and control of the universities. So the fiat itself may just be created very quickly, but it's backed by organizations which do have a lot of power, and therefore I think it's a mistake to underestimate this. And to some extent also, there are many problems with this situation, and Bitcoiners can and do, and rightfully do, also explained all the flaws and all the misallocation of resources and all the waste and so on. But nonetheless, at least in the Western world, the fact is, historically speaking, now we do have very, very high living standards, and that has occurred with what has been a basically fiat system for the last 50 years. So I think, and these things then, because it's so powerful and because it has had a fair degree of economic success, This then does have, of course, organizational and institutional momentum. I mean, things of this nature, or unless there's some big catastrophe, tend to perpetuate themselves. So I think there will be at least there will be some time where fiat systems and Bitcoin do coexist. And I would also say what's also quite interesting, there has been pushback from the fiat side. I mean, there has been some resistance on the fiat, or from the fiat world, with regard to Bitcoin. Nonetheless, I think it could have been a lot worse. Like, I think regulators and governments could have been, especially if they've been coordinated, and they do coordinate with some things. They could have been extremely aggressive against Bitcoin. They could have made things much harder than they are today. I mean, the fact is, in most jurisdictions, you can. It's maybe not trivially easy, but you can buy Bitcoin. It's legal to hold Bitcoin. Mostly, it's legal to mine Bitcoin, and then, of course, we've seen over the years and the last decade, really, like, increasing number of fiat world financial products with connections to Bitcoin, both sort of Bitcoin companies listed on stock exchanges, and then all the Bitcoin products. So I think you'll have a period where both coexist, and my hope personally would be that would be on a more cooperative rather than a confrontational mode. And then, as you say, like with referring to Gresham's law, people will use the money which is best suited to the use case. So if your use case is store of value, well, clearly it's Bitcoin. There's no discussion. But paying at a supermarket for your eggs and milk, well, at the moment the fiat solution works well. So, and it's an established solution, and there's no huge disadvantage to it. In fact, with pure cash, you can even be more private than, you have even more privacy than Bitcoin. So, I mean, to summarize, I would say there will be still some period where you will have coexistence, but with growing adoption of Bitcoin, just because in some senses it is so much more superior to fiat currency.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's sort of almost, if you look at a layered money approach, there's this kind of swap out of the reserve asset at the top of the pyramid with Bitcoin potentially, and then that means people can sort of continue on, and systems are relatively similar. You know, it's still the same point of sale systems, it's still the same banknotes, etc. But maybe there's something on the back end that changes, which is one way of looking at it potentially, and then that would reflect maybe closer to something like the gold standard than historically, but with the added 21st century innovations of digital payments and tap and go and all of these things which we have in the fiat world as well. And I'm curious maybe how those fit together, because you then almost start getting the different qualities of Bitcoin, where there's the real Bitcoin where you're self-custodying it and you're using it as Bitcoin, and then you've got the fiat that's backed by Bitcoin, which lives within the fiat world. And that's kind of an interesting kind of four-dimensional relationship, which is maybe a little bit hard to conceptualize. You know, I don't know, do we ever get medium of exchange or unit of account if everyone's still using local fiat currency denominations and they just happen to be backed way up the chain somewhere with some kind of Bitcoin, etc.
Yeah, I mean, that's where these whole, I mean, what you mentioned about the layered solution, I would also go along with, and that's where you have this whole, in the Bitcoin world, of course, where you have the whole layer 2 solutions like Lightning or Liquid RGB, etc. And yeah, you could have a scenario where you have Bitcoin native layered solutions for medium of exchange, and then you could have what you mentioning, where you have still a fiat system, or a system which has been developed from the current fiat system, but with Bitcoin backing. I mean, I think it's difficult to say how it will pan out in the future, really. That's because it is so novel.
Yeah.
And also because with I mean, it is also somewhere where you can, banks and the financial system have to be quite cautious. They can't introduce systems which don't work. If people can't buy food at the supermarkets, then you have really a big problem. So they have to be quite cautious about how they introduce changes to the system. But I mean, even in the conventional financial system, forgetting about the Bitcoin side of it, there have been advances. I mean, you've of course had this whole touch and pay system, which has come up in the last, say, I would say 10, 15 years. Then of course the transitions to having your smartphone wallets and being able to pay with this, and you've had the whole phenomenon of neobanks. Of course, you've had the digital payment systems based on fiat systems like PayPal, Venmo in the US. So I mean, as we wrote in the book, finance industry does take up new technology, and of course, from a conventional financial point of view, they're not as focused on Bitcoin as they are. But for them, Bitcoin is just one of many different things which they're interested in. But nonetheless, you're quite right with Gresham's law, and another Bitcoiner I know, he often says the parallel of, he's an Argentinian, and he brings up this parallel between Argentinian peso and the dollar, and there you also had essentially peso being devalued and continually devalued, and people trying as much as they could to move to the US dollar. And you could have something similar with Bitcoin as well. But again, over time, people seeing, okay, if I want to store value, it's better for me to hold Bitcoin and fiat currencies, and just people just taking the choice which is optimal for them.
Yeah, I think that's why maybe there's, again, this ecosystem approach is important, where you understand the importance of decentralizing nodes, having your own keys, these kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, speaking of Argentina, I just had some Argentinian friends visit, and they wanted some US dollar, hard money, well, not hard money, but cash, as hard as it gets, at least in that part of the world.
Yeah.
And so they, it was selling Bitcoin for US dollars, and again, that still connects back into the fiat system. And I mean, I appreciate this is a bit speculative, this side of the conversation, but I'm more and more interested in soliciting people's thoughts on this, because it seems as if...
How do you see it how do you see it developing? What's your sort of...
Oh, for me, I mean, I'm...
view of the future?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of still collecting perspectives. I don't have any real crystal ball as such, but really interested in how these kind of these worlds collide, because they really are different things. And again, within the Bitcoin space, everything works so smoothly and so easy to work with, but it's when you start trying to use that in the real world, and that's the challenge. And I appreciate that as a criticism people have had, and we could say that we are just early, but at the same time, countries have been able to bootstrap currencies in much shorter periods of time, and that is through decree and through chartalism. They define money, and then that becomes money. And I wonder, just running the scenarios, where do we get to with the outlawed Bitcoin, for example, the classic topic, where you and I are able to transact maybe, and as resistance money we can use Bitcoin, but most people are still potentially using fiat that, as I said, somewhere up the chain is backed by some kind of Bitcoin ETF type situation, and they go about their daily life, none the wiser. And does that lead to this sort of majority and minority type setup where the Bitcoiners are self-sovereign and they do what they want, and then everyone else is still within a kind of neo-fiat where ostensibly there's Bitcoin up the chain that gives the system stability, but you're still KYC'd and using third parties and banks and stuff. So I don't know. I have certainly a hope that it would be more free and everyone's running their own thing and they've got their own keys, etc. But I'm keen to sort of compare what the different outlooks might be and sort of compare and contrast and sort of see where things are at, because I mean this doesn't exist in a vacuum, and if you look at the work that they're doing on CBDCs, the stuff that the government's pushing for, that's not stopping. And they're certainly in my country, they're pushing forward with it. So, I mean, that's sort of my high-level take at the moment. Is it's important to kind of gather opinions and maybe not be dogmatic about how a currency forms, because, again, the engineering solution potentially is there, and we can look at it. This is how technically it would bootstrap, but then there's a whole social, cultural narrative and move to it, similar to the way Bitcoin itself got started. It required these different kinds of people getting together for it to kind of emerge and get to where it is today. But what is the next thing? Is it massive currency crisis that helps everyone get ready to move into Bitcoin, or is there some other black swan type event that, because I mean the argument, if you look at somewhere like Greece 2015, maybe Bitcoin wasn't ready at that point to take on the Greek people and have them using Bitcoin natively. And so they ended up just floundering around and searching for US dollars, I guess. Whereas maybe the next time that happens, is Bitcoin in a better place to be ready for that, etc.?
Well, I mean, my hope would be if something like that does come along, that as many people as possible have their own Bitcoin, so that they are as insulated from that as they can be. I mean, the ideal situation, of course, is you just have like a smooth transfer over, like more and more people, families, organizations, states are convinced by Bitcoin. It just you have like a very smooth and positive transition from an old technology to a new technology. Like the more, I would say, negative scenarios, of course, that you do have some big catastrophic event. Of course, you can, as you say, you had the Greek and more generally European financial crisis, and then you have, of course, looking back in history, series of financial crashes in 1987, 1929, and so on. Obviously, they're hard to predict, and I think also it's like you will still have that in the Bitcoin standard. In fact, you will probably even have it more, because I mean you see in the Bitcoin and more generally in cryptocurrencies do have these big sort of swings between the euphoric phases and then the big crashes. And you had that in 2022 with these whole series of bankruptcies of 3R Capital and all these other companies which collapsed. And of course, that is one of, I wouldn't say it's an advantage necessarily, but one of the characteristics of the fiat system is they print money to try and ameliorate these situations. What obviously often happens is they end up kicking the can down the road. Well, you just don't have that with Bitcoin. You don't have an instance. It's decentralized. You don't have a centralizing organization who will organize a bailout. There is no central bank, and there's no mechanism to print money to prop up the organizations which did fail. So you end up with the situations where a big crash is really a big crash, and no one steps in. It just has to play out, just like in 2022, you have the domino effect, and it's not like back in 2009, Lehman Brothers collapses, and then the government says, "Oh dear," and then says all the other ones. It's like the first domino collapses, and then every other domino which must collapse, in fact, does collapse because there's no one to catch them.
Yeah. Well, one other way of looking at this. So again, I'm soliciting opinions and thoughts on this, because I think there is a dogmatic argument that Bitcoin just wins, and we can wait a very long time and that will happen potentially as well. But I am very interested in that short to medium term and sort of what the tactical maneuverings are, and sort of where the pressure points and pain points are for the fiat system and the state in particular. And as you say, there's a smooth possibility where it just sort of is welcomed in, and there's the resistance money route where things are maybe a little bit more chaotic. And I'm reminded of in New Zealand, there was the move from the New Zealand pound to the New Zealand dollar in 1967, along with decimalisation, which I believe happened in the UK and other parts of the Commonwealth as well, where you went from like shillings and however many 12s and 24 base 12 money. You moved from that to decimal money, and that was a very smooth process that literally just took one day, and that was the decimal day, and they moved over. But that was because the state was driving it, right? And effectively that was a new currency because you had, you know, old notes and you had old coinage and everything, and it was suddenly reminted and swapped over. And there was sort of a period in between where you could transfer, and those were compatible. But as it stands today, no one uses the New Zealand pound. It's not legal tender. So effectively, that was a rug pull, and so there's the possibility if the government embraces it, you know, that it could be something like that. But then the other side is, it stays as sort of background radiation, lingering resistance money, used by few and far between as self-sovereign money, and those people maybe gain a lot of wealth through doing that. But when was the last time people were really interested in freedom anyway? You know, so. I don't know. Yeah.
And how is it in Japan actually? I mean, how is the government's approach to that? And were they particularly affected by this whole Mount Gox situation? Did that have like an influence on how the government there sees it?
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm really super qualified to comment on Japan, but certainly Mount Gox had a very strong chilling effect on Bitcoin in Japan. I mean, it's got its own issues. I mean, it is the currency has lost so much value since it started. I mean, it used to be 1 yen to $1 US back in the day, you know, 100 years ago. But that has changed massively, and so I think, I'm not sort of super qualified to comment on that. But I think the bigger piece around again that convertibility, people's thoughts on medium of exchange, it still is rooted in this nation-state currency and this fiat currency, and does that get to a point where it sort of gets swapped out again at a higher layer? And arguably, I mean, this is a bit more of a bullish argument we could adopt. Is Bitcoin already the reserve currency of the world, and people just haven't realised it yet? At what point do people understand that there's a mathematical reality to the absolute scarcity that a few of us hold, and everything else is a layer 2 on top of that? I mean, that's another argument, and so that sort of flips the perspective a little bit. It's sort of the same picture, but you're looking at it in a different way. And that, I mean, arguably that's already hyper-Bitcoinization has happened, and we're just experiencing the transition now to a full Bitcoin rollout, potentially.
Yeah. I think that's quite certainly an optimistic perspective.
Well, I mean, it's true though. I mean, you could measure, government reserves, and basically everything can be measured in Bitcoin, just as Bitcoin can be measured in fiat currencies. So, and Bitcoin's been growing in strength against all of those fiat currencies. So I don't know it's kind of like what's sharper than a diamond, and you test it by sharpening other things, and which one scratches it. And I mean, nothing can scratch Bitcoin, nothing can make a dent. So arguably that's one way of framing it, and I think that framing is really important because it is an ecosystem, right? As you say, and coming back to your engineering background, it's kind of like, if you think about an internal combustion engine, there's no point where you can kind of point out the vehicle's sort of energy cycle. You've got the moving parts of the engine, you've got the radiator, the drive chain. It's sort of the whole thing acts in unison, and as the car moves, as the pistons move around, they then create the momentum that can pull more gas into the cylinders, and there's this sort of this engine that keeps going. It's not just like a one-shot thing, it's sort of four-dimensional, and I think maybe there's some analogies there with sort of the way Bitcoin has just sort of like suddenly got momentum, and it's taken flight.
I would agree with. I think the momentum is, you can express it as a kind of network effect. I mean, the more people use Bitcoin, just because of not necessarily because of the financial value, but just because of the number of participants in the network becomes more useful, thus attracting more people, and so on, as a snowball effect. I think we're just in the middle of, or maybe not in the middle per se, but we're certainly not at the start. We're in some stage of this process, and I mean, because Bitcoin is so that much superior to previous form of money, I think this will just continue unless there's some very aggressive unless either A, there's some big catastrophe, like there's some big technical catastrophe to Bitcoin, whatever that might be, or B, some very aggressive and also worldwide coordinated action taken by the state. But otherwise, I think it just rolls and rolls and rolls, just as I say, like cars or a smartphone. More people use cars, then the streets are improved to help their use, and then cars become even more useful for more people, then mass production becomes feasible, then because the mass production becomes, cars become cheaper, then even more people want to use them, etc., then more petrol stations are built because there's more demand for petrol, then it's even more interesting, and so on and so forth. Same for Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder whether that's not where the speculative aspect is very necessary, because cypherpunks and libertarians alone, it's a very powerful group, and the libertarians have been operating for a long time. Classic gold bug idea. But maybe possibly it is the speculators and arguably even the statists who are coming in and are holding Bitcoin and want to see it succeed, and so people peppered throughout government personally hold Bitcoin, etc. You know, they benefit too as individuals, and that's maybe the magic source here. Coming back to what I started with, something that struck me about your book is you mentioned that kind of push and pull of all of these parties. So even though it could be pushed away by the government, when people within government are getting rich from Bitcoin too, and they're storing their value there, maybe they won't come after it and they'll do something else instead.
Yeah, I mean, and that I would see that's the advantage of institutional adoption. Of course, I mean, well, that's not a whole discussion, but of course the state is very closely connected to, of course, the large financial institutions who are now actively pushing Bitcoin with their new products, and also they're very connected to universities, and some universities also have as part of their endowments Bitcoin holdings. So you have large influential entities who are close to the government who would be sure to raise their hands if the government were more aggressive.
They're working for us. That's great.
And what you said also, I mean, that's about people in government. I would say that it's quite similar to what my co-author Marco said on another podcast we did recently. Of course, you just have a generation change, and when younger people, new people come in who are more sort of positive towards Bitcoin, they're actually part of the system, well, then of course that will have an influence on the system itself. It's just a natural sort of progression. The generations change, and new things come with new generations. Just as in history. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, Anthony, I am keen just then briefly to talk about what's next for you and what you're currently working on as well, if there's anything you've got on the go at the moment.
Sure. So regarding the book, so the audio book came out earlier this year. So I spent some time earlier this year preparing the audio book, which came out in the market in summer. And at the moment, we've been working quite hard on the translations. So all four authors have connections to Germany. So Marco and Marco are both born and bred Germans. I'm a naturalized German, although originally from the UK. And Zoran also lived for part of his life in Germany. So we have a German translation, a German version coming out soon, and then also in one or two other languages in particular. We are hoping that we will manage to get Chinese Mandarin out before too long, and then we have another one or two languages in the pipeline.
Excellent, that sounds good. So that's going to keep you occupied for a little while then, working on that.
Yeah, it's been a little translating a book from English to German, which are quite similar languages. It's not quite as straightforward as I thought originally. I mean, I'm an engineer, so I mean I can speak fluent German, but I'm not a translator or working in this. But it's coming along well.
Yeah, excellent, awesome. And if people want to find you, Anthony, where can they go?
Well, our website for the book is decryptingmoney.com, and there's contact details there, or on Twitter. My Twitter name is Jeffreys, my surname 000.
Excellent. All right, mate. Well, I appreciate your time and sharing what you've I've been doing, and talking about the book a little bit. Certainly interesting to me, and again, thank you for the copy, and much appreciated.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me on your show. It's been an interesting chat. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you for listening. I am Cody Allingham, and that was The Transformation of Value. If you would like to support this show, please consider making a donation either through my website or by directly tipping to the show's Bitcoin wallet, or just pass this episode on to a friend who you think may enjoy it. And you can always email me at hello@thetransformationofvalue.com.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the show. Another Friday, another episode of Why Are We Bullish? Got an awesome panel. I hope everybody's having a good week. Definitely a bullish week. Wild to see Bitcoin over 100K for the first time in history. Pretty epic moment. So very excited. It's going to be a good time. Good time today. Of course, this is live. Anything can happen. So I defer to my friend Bill here.
We'll do it live. Okay. We'll do it live. Fuck it. Do it live. I'll write it and we'll do it live. Thing sucks.
Now, if you have not already, like, subscribe, share, all those things, they really do help a ton getting this content in front of more eyeballs. I am Ben of the BTC Sessions. This is your daily session.
Hodl the Bitcoin.
Now, before we bring in our guests, let's take a quick look at where we are in the market right now. I am pulling up timechaincalendar.com. We are currently sitting at $100,696 per coin. A single US dollar will now grab you less than 1,000 sats, 993 sats at the moment. In terms of fees, next block 11 sats per VByte, and in terms of Bitcoin mine, we're sitting at 19.79 million, which is 94.24% of the total supply. We're going to give a quick shout out to sponsors of the show, and we'll be back in about a minute to bring in our panelists. So we'll see you guys coming right up. Bitcoin Well is one of the best places to be buying and selling Bitcoin in Canada and the US. And now with the advent of Bitcoin Well Infinite, high net worth individuals can enjoy an OTC desk with white glove experience tailored to transactions of $50,000 or more. This helps high net worth individuals, family offices, businesses, and trusts secure the best prices and execute large transactions with speed and efficiency. You can expect personalized service, rapid fulfillment, no slippage, custom trade structures, risk management guidance, and global buy and sell capabilities. And hey, if you're not a high net worth individual, not to worry, you can still benefit. If you sign up and you refer people through your personalized link, any fees paid on their first purchases will earn you 21% of those fees. So you can check them out today. There's a link down below to sign up, or you can simply scan the QR code on the screen. Bitcoin Well, check them out today. CoinKite